Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Hayomi, the last daf in Chagiga, the last daf in the Seder Moed. We learned for a four shleim for Shlomo ben Rachel Yosef, Azriel ben Chaim Michal, and Elazar ben Reuma. Finishing 2 years of Moed today. So we were discussing yesterday the issue of the Shulchan and the Mizbeach. Can the Shulchan become Tameh? The Shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Heichal, can that become Tameh or not? So we had this discussion. On the one hand, we said it's a Kli Eitz, which is made for being stationary, and that's not Makabel Tumah. And that's not Makabel Tumah, because only if it's movable, we learn out from the pasuk of Beged or Sak that it's Makabel Tumah, and this is not. So the Gemara then says, yeah, but they do pick it up at the time of the regalim and show it to everybody. So on the other hand, it is movable. So if that's the case, is it Makabel Tumah? We said, be careful, don't be Makabel. But why don't you say that even if you say that it would be something which is stationary and wouldn't be Makabel Tumah, even if it would be that, what about the cover, the lining, the overlay is gold, and that is Makabel Tumah? That's what the Gemara discussed. So the Gemara went through this discussion and said maybe it's only good wood, bad wood, and then we came out and at the end we said that shiny shulchan at the very beginning of Daf Chav, shiny shulchan Rachmana Karetz. Hashem called it eitz. Rachmana Karetz. Avchu Mitzupa, says Rashi. Even when it's overlaid with gold, it's called eitz, and therefore it's as a kli of eitz. Normally, it wouldn't be makabel tumah, except for the fact that it is movable, and if it's kli eitz which is movable, l'chora, it would be makabel tumah. So therefore, you could say that's why they said be careful. They told the Kohen and Mamaratzim in the Beis Hamikdash at the end, at the end of time, be careful, don't be matamiyah, because it could be makabel tumah. And the question was, anyway, what about the mateches? The mateches, we say, doesn't do anything because, as he said before, Rabbi Yehuda said, so it should be tamei, except for the fact that the Torah calls it eitz. So therefore, we don't look at the tzipui. We don't look at the fact that there's a gold plate on it, and gold is makabel tumah, because Rashi said kli mateches is not mukash to eitz, and not mukash to sak rather, and mateches is makabel tumah. But over here, the Torah says no. We don't look at the overlay. We consider it made out of eitz. T'chsiv hamizbeach eitz. It says that the mizbeach is made out of eitz. But when we talk about the shulchan, we'll see. Pasuk says mizbeach eitz sholish amas gavoa, 3 amas high, and a length of 2. Yeah.
Ephraim, isn't a kli eitz? Yes, that has that's a kli kibul. Isn't it makabel eitz, even if it's peshutah kli eitz? So why come on that you can move it? It's a kli kibul.
Right. It has a base kibul, so you could put things on it, and therefore it should be makabel tumah, except if it's stationary. If it's stationary, a kli. We're not talking about pshutei kli eitz, which doesn't have a base kibul. Even this, which has a base kibul, it has a place to put the breads on there, so it would be makabel tumah, except for the fact that it's stationary. If it's stationary, but we said it's not really stationary, so therefore it should be makabel tumah. So and then we said, yeah, but even if forget about the fact that it's stationary, not stationary. There's an overlay of gold, and that should make it be makabel tumah. So she said, no, we don't look at that. The Torah calls it eitz, even when it's covered. After mitzvah, it's still considered eitz. Where's the Torah say that? In Yecheskel it says, "Mizbeach eitz shalosh amas gavoa, 3 amas high, va'orcho shtayim amas, and a length of 2 amas, mitzosav lo, and its corners are like it too, made out of eitz. Va'orcho bikirosav eitz, and its length and its walls are made out of wood. By Yidaber Eliza, and Hashem said to me, this is Yecheskel speaking, Hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem, asher lifnei Hashem. This is the shulchan which is before God. Okay, so here we're talking about the shulchan. We say, okay, the shulchan. This is the shulchan which is wood. The Torah calls it wood. So therefore, again, since it's wood, and it would be makabel tumah, except for the fact that it's made stationary, then it's not. But we said it's not stationary because it's movable, so it would be makabel tumah in theory. And I mean, it could be makabel tumah, and therefore we said, be careful, don't be matamiyah. Who are we speaking to? When they pick it up, the fact that it's movable, even when it's not, even when it's sitting on the ground, it still could be makabel tumah since it is movable. So we said, be careful, don't be matamid. But the question over here, the Gemara asks, is okay, fine. You're talking about the shulchan, but the beginning of the pasuk said mizbeach. Hamizbeach eitz. You said the mizbeach, the altar was eitz. Shalosh amos gives the dimensions, and the construction is made out of the composite is made out of wood. And then it's Vayidabra Eli Zeh Shulchan Shem. This is the Shulchan. What do you mean this is the Shulchan? You're talking about the Mizbeach. Pasuk Mizbeach. The Pasuk starts off talking about the altar. B'Sayim Shulchan. It ends up with the table where you put the lechem upon him. What's going on over here? Are we talking about Mizbeach or the Shulchan? Where the base meters exists. Mizbeach Mechaper Al Adam. We bring karbanos, and that atones for our sins. Achshav. But now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, Shulchan Shalom Mechaper Alav. A person's shulchan is what atones for him. How is that? Says Rashi, B'achnasas orchim. By inviting guests, inviting the poor and the needy over to your house, that's what says kapara for you. And the Farshim say, Tosfos says also that the eating itself, that is like the Mizbeach is eating, the Gadol Koach HaLegima, like just swallowing it, just like the altar eats our karbanos, by people eating our food, that is also an atonement for us. So that's the famous Rasha. Meanwhile, though, we say that the shulchan, is the shulchan makabel tumah or not? We came out, the shulchan could be makabel tumah for two, right? It could be makabel tumah, and because it's a kli eitz, which is movable, and even without the overlay, it's still a kli which is movable. The Gemara said, okay, even if you didn't have that reason, it should be tumah because the overlay. No, the overlay is batul to the thing itself. Then we said in the Mishnah said, if you look at the top of Chavav and Beis, we learned yesterday, they all had replacements. There was a second and a third one. If the first ones become tamei, you bring the other ones and place them, use the other ones. Then we said, they all need tefillah, except for the mizbeachs, the altars. There's two altars. There's mizbeach hachoshes, which was outside where they brought regular karbanos were sacrificed there, and then mizbeach hazav, which was for the ketores and for the dam, etc. On let's say on Yom Kippur and things of that sort, or Pam Davar Shel Tzibur, things like that, where they used the mizbeach hazav on which is the inner mizbeach, also called the mizbeach hapnimi. Mizbeach, it's also called mizbeach ketores. Mizbeach Nechoshes, which was Nechoshes at the time of Moshe, was also called Mizbeach Adama or Mizbeach Achitzoni. In any case, these do not need tefillah. Why? Because they are like ground. Karka, anything attached to the ground doesn't need tefillah. Doesn't have to go to the mikveh. That is not makabel tumah. That's the general idea. So he says that. So the Mishnah Gemara now says Kolakam should be because Sheish Lamishnim has the second one. We're not talking about the second and the third ones. We said yesterday that the lashon of was the beginning of the Mishnah said case of ma'avirin altaras hazara, right? How do they pass? Over a regular ma'avirin altaras hazara. The previous Mishnah had said ma'avirin. So we said we move them. So the question was, which ones are we moving? The mizbeachs don't need to go to the mikveh, right? And the shulchan can't go to the mikveh. Why? Because it's got to stay there all the time, right? You can't take the lechem upon away. So we're not which one, and the other ones don't really have a place. Don't have a specific. The menorah has a place, according to the one who said that the menorah also you're not tovel. Menorah tanati damai. This says izar shematig b'shulchan menorah. In other words, the menorah also wasn't moved. So which ones? The shulchan and the menorah are not go to the mikveh because they can't be moved. The mizbeach hazav doesn't need because it's karka. And the other ones don't really have a specific place. They can move them. So what's the lashon of ma'avirin? It's a little bit strange. What does ma'avirin mean? Unless you say for the menorah, if you hold like our Mishnah, the menorah could go to the mikveh, so you could say speaking about that. But we said yesterday there's different explanations for the word ma'avirin. It doesn't necessarily mean move from its regular place. It could mean ma'avirin like, oh, well, it's just you do it right away, or ma'avirin you push away other mitzvahs because you take care of this right away, right after Yontif. You put these in the mikveh. Those were the lashonos of ma'avirin, right? One was over lasiyasan, and one was that you do it right away. And there was a third one. I don't recall what there was. We said it yesterday. What the ma'avirin was, lashon ma'avirin, that that we stop. We do it right away. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. So on the idea that we say that the mizbeach hanachoshes and the mizbeach hazav don't need tefillah. They don't have to go to the mikvah. Why? Because they're like karka. How do we know that? Mizbeach nechoshes t'chsiv mizbach adama tasali. Mizbeach nechoshes at the time of Shlomo's, and as the real base of Mikdash is supposed to have mizbeach adama. It's not simply a brass one that Moshe used in the Mishkan, which was transportable. But it says the real mizbeach is called mizbeach adama. It's made out of stone and earth. Tasali, right? Tasali. So he says mizbeach adama. It's called adama. It says Rashi. Mizbeach shemalon of olos v'shlomim, because it says it mizbeach adama tasali v'zabach olah v'olosech v'shlomecha es b'chorga v'eslonecha, right? At the end of Yisro. So it says mizbeach adama, and that's the one that you bring the olos and the shlomim, which is the mizbeach hachitzon, the mizbeach hanachoshes. So mizbeach shemalon of olos behind the mizbeach hanachoshes, and it's called mizbeach adama. So you see, it's called the ground. It's like in the ground. It's karka, and therefore doesn't need to go to the mikvah. Mizbeach hazov. Why is Mizbeach hazov also like that, as like karka? After all, it's not really karka. It's movable. It's a small little thing, an amma by an amma, right? The whole is not very big. Mizbeach hazov t'chsiv hamenorah v'mizbachos. In the pasuk it says the menorah and the mizbachos, all the mizbeach, all the mizbeachs, all the altars. Iskish mizbachos zelazeh. So since the Mizbeach hazov is, or the Mizbeach haktoros, Mizbeach haknimi, whatever you call it, is compared, juxtaposed with the Mizbeach Adama, just like the Mizbeach Adama or the Mizbeach Hanachoshes is considered ground, is considered karka, and therefore some makabel tuma. This one also is not makabel tuma. So it's like a doraisa that the Mizbeach are not makabel tuma. However, the shulchan and the menorah could be makabel tuma, and therefore we have to be careful.
So what is the ekashir between the two mizbachot?
Right, it's the one word mizbachot, the various mizbachot. Now, what do you mean the mizbachot? Right, what do we the inner one and the outer one, right? The inner one and the outer one.
But the truth is, the psukim we're referring to, all that was movable. Right.
Even
the Mizbeach Adama was movable.
That's right. It was really movable. Because the pasuk calls it Adama karka, right? Even at the time of Moshe, it was still considered karka. So what happened? The last words of the Mishnah were that we said that the Mizbeach Hazov and Mizbeach Hanachoshes don't need tefillah because they're considered karka. They're considered like ground, like attached to the ground. Divrei Rebbe Lezer. Chum say no, Neshem Mitzupin, because they are covered with what? They are covered with, overlaid with gold. Now, what do we mean with Neshem Mitzupin? So we're saying, presumably we're talking about the Mizbeach Hazov, or the Mizbeach Hanachoshes when it was really Nechoshes, not the Mizbeach Adama, right? The Mizbeach Hanachoshes, it was brass. So it was considered. In other words, what Michael's saying is that at the time it was movable, and we're talking about the time of Moshe. Yeah, so Mizbeach Hanachoshes, but it was called Mizbeach Adama. So therefore, it's considered karka, even though it's Mizbeach Hanachoshes, even though it's overlaid with brass, and the other one's overlaid with gold. So Chum say because they're overlaid. Well, wait a minute. Overlaid is not a reason that they shouldn't be makabel tuma. If they're like karka, that's the reason they shouldn't be makabel tuma. But that they're overlaid with metal, whatever the metal is not a reason that they shouldn't. It's the reason they should be makabel tuma. Says the Gemara Adarabba. Keeping the mitzupin in, since they are overlaid with metal, mitamu, they should accept tuma. They are susceptible to tuma. Just the opposite. So what do you mean the Chum say? Chum are saying the Tanakama says. I mean that's what Rebbe Lezer says. You know why the mizbachos are not makabel tuma? Because they are compared to the ground. They're like stationary. They're like in the ground. Even if they're not stationary, but they're in the ground. They're considered like karka. Because the pasuk calls them mizbach adama, so it's considered like karka. Chum say no. It's because they're overlaid. Overlaid is the reason why they should be makabel tuma. That's what the Gemara asked. It says aim of a chum mitam neshem mitzum. So the first answer is enechanami. The chum disagree. The chum say they are makabel tuma, even though the Torah calls them the ground, but since they are covered with gold or with brass, whatever the metal is, they're makabel tuma. Ibay sema, or I could tell you no, there is no machlokas. Everybody agrees that the mizbeach and the mizbachos are not makabel tuma. Ibay sema, Rabbanan or Rebbe Lezer coming. They're speaking to Rebbe Lezer. They said to Rebbe Lezer, "My diet of mishum the mitzupin. Why do you say you need the pasuk? Why do you say you need the pasuk? How do you know that they are not makabel tuma? Because the pasuk calls them mizbach adama, right? It's like in the ground, and therefore it's not makabel tuma. Why do you need the pasuk? Why would you think that they are makabel tuma? Because they are overlaid with metal. My daitach mishum de mitzupin. You think it because they are mitzupin, and therefore the tzipui, the cover is mavatal them, and they're not considered karka, and they're like mateches. Miftal batal tzipuyin. The overlay is batal to the item itself, gabayu. The pasuk is mevatal in themselves. Why? Drachmana kari eitz, like we had before. We had at the end yesterday's stuff. We're talking about the shulchan. Shulchan is covered with gold. So we said if it's covered with gold, that's the reason why it should be makabel tumah, right? So it should be makabel tumah because of that. But forget about the fact that it's movable or not movable, or kliyetz rasul nachas not makabel tumah. What about the fact that it's overlaid with gold? That's what the Gemara asked yesterday, right? The Gemara said typically makabel tumah, even if it's also nachas, because it's overlaid. So what was our answer at the top of the page? No, because the Torah calls the shulchan eitz, but it also in this pasuk we said the Torah also calls the mizbeach eitz, right? Mizbeach eitz and the shulchan. So we said, why does it call shulchan and mizbeach? Because it's mechaper for you either way, either the mizbeach or the shulchan is mechaper for you. But the pasuk calls the mizbeach eitz just like it calls the shulchan eitz. So therefore, the Chacham is saying to Reb Lezer, why do you need a pasuk of mizbach adamah to teach me that the mizbachos are like karka and they're not makabel tumah? They're not makabel tumah. What's your reason? Why do you need a pasuk? Oh, you think because it's covered with gold and therefore it would be makabel tumah? No, the Torah says that gold, that brass or the gold is batel. It's nullified by the item itself. It's batel to the item itself. Mevetel batel tzipoin gabayu, as the pasuk said. Rashi says Rachmana kara eitz lekulu. Torah calls them both. Shulchan and the mizbech are called eitz. Uvelav ikranami lo makabel tumah. Even without the pasuk of mizbach adamah, they wouldn't be makabel tumah because it's a kli eitz. And this is certainly the mizbech. By the way, is certainly a kli eitz ha'osu linachas. It's certainly a kli of eitz which is made to put down. Now, the truth, the mizbech of Shlomo, which was much bigger, right? Which was much bigger, and of course, the one of is very big. That's not a kli eitz anymore. That's a structure. That's a proper structure. But the mizbech of Moshe, the mizbech of Moshe, the mizbech of Zav, they were kalim, but they were also linachas, and therefore the eitz. He says, you know what? You don't need a pasuk mizbach adamah to say it's karka. The reason amakabel tumah is because the metal is batel to the item itself, and the item itself, the Torah says, is called eitz. That's why it's batel. You can argue, is it batel or is it not batel? But the Torah says it's eitz lekulu. Ubelaf ikra, without the pasuk of adama, also wouldn't be makabel tumah because the Torah calls it eitz, and it's a kli eitz also nachas. The shulchan, we said before, maybe is not made to be stationary because they pick it up and show everybody the bread, but the mizbech is certainly made to be stationary. Amar Bavu. So the Gemara ends off with a nice, many times the Masechtas ends off with a nice, idea. Amar Bavu, Amar Blazer, Tamnei Chacham, Ein Ur Shel Gehenim Shel Etzben. The fire of Gehenim does not rule over and does not overtake the Tamnei Chacham. Why? Kavachom mi salamandra. Kavachom from the salamander, not the salamander that we know today, but salamander we have today some sort of a big fish or whatever, or some sort of a rodent. But here we're talking about the salamander, which is similar. They say it's similar to a mouse or some sort of a rat of some sort that is made out of fire. Uma salamander told us Aish. Salamander, Rashi says, is a derivative of fire. Rashi says chaya. It's a beast, hanivros min ha'or, that's created from fire. Sheborin eish b'makom echad sheva shan. When you have a fire that goes on for 7 years, somehow a creature is made from there. Tamid, b'li hefsek. If the fire doesn't stop for 7 years, others say 70 years. And there's whatever the salamander was. It's some mystic or there's a legend that this salamander is created from fire. And if you take the blood of this salamander, I guess it's not a fish because it's got blood, right? If you smear it on you, then fire. That's a fire retardant. Fire doesn't. It's a good fire retardant. The blood of the salamander. So he says the kavachom salamander should told us is a derivative of fire. But asach midama, if you anoint yourself with that blood, ein ur sholetas bo, the fire does not rule over you. Meaning, it's a fire retardant, keeps the fire away. Talmud Chacham shagol kufan eish. Talmud Chacham whose whole body is eish d'chsiv halo kod varai keish num Hashem. My words are fire, and a Talmid Chacham is full of the words of Hashem. His whole body is like eish. Alachas kama kama. Certainly, the fire will not rule over him. The fire cannot consume him and cannot hurt him at all. Rashi says, Rashi says that, but Tosfos says that Tosfos says a little bit differently. Tosfos says that in talking about the next case, he talks about. I want to leave this last piece for the Siyam, but the idea is that the Or of Gehenna does not show not only on Talmidei Chacham, but even people who aren't Talmidei Chachamim also, but they're still full of mitzvahs. Why? Mepharshim say because they have the mitzvahs of tzedakah and chesed, and those mitzvahs you're makayim even if you did it shalol lishma. And he gives an example from the mizbeach. That's why it's related to our Gemara over here about the mizbeach. The mizbeach Hazav was this very small mizbeach, right? Very small mizbeach, an am and a half in the heichal, and they had a gold plate on it. And yet, when there was fire on it, the Ketores was burnt on it, etc. Nothing happened to it. So Rashi says because it's gold, miraculously nothing happened to thin layer of gold. If you have gold and you have fire on it constantly, the gold's going to melt. It's going to erode, and you're going to lose something, right? That was one miracle. Tosfos says even more that it protected not just that nothing happened to the gold, but it protected the wood from there. So just like that gold protected the wood, so the same way the mitzvahs that we have protect us from the fire of Gehenna. All right, we'll leave the last few lines for the Siyam later this morning. Rumi, I take it you didn't fly in for the Siyam.
Not for lack of trying. We're thinking about it. But just
okay. All right. And now we'll take a look at Yavamas. Okay, tomorrow's the first day of Yavamas, and it looks like a pretty short daf if you don't learn the Tosfos, but it's a little bit complicated. Now, don't be afraid of Yavamas. People are afraid of Yavamas because the three. Pardon? Okay, well, I'll tell you, there's three mesechtas they call ani that they claim to be the hardest mesechtas in Shas. Eruvin, ani is an abbreviation for Eruvin, Nida, and Yavamas. So I find Eruvin to be the hardest because all the diagrams and figuring it out and what are the rules, etc. Yavamas, there's all these charts are coming out, and there's all kinds of sparring with the charts and the diagrams of this one's married to this one. It's not really that it's not that complicated. It's just you have to follow the case, but it's not like the lumdus is so difficult to understand. So here we're going to have like a little bit of an introduction to Yavamas. What is Yavamas? It's they call that a levirate marriage, meaning a marriage within the family. When a person dies, when a man dies with no children, then somebody else in the family is supposed to marry him. Now, the real Yivam that we're talking about is a brother and a brother from the father. We don't look. The mother doesn't count. The mother doesn't count. In fact, the mother is usher, as we're going to talk about. If it's a brother from the mother, there's not only not even, but it's usher, as we'll see. So we had already in the Torah, right? Yehuda's sons, right? They died, and then Shelah didn't want to wait for Shelah B'ni and all that. So there you find this concept of Yibum. And of course, we have it in Rus, right? With Elimelech, there it was understood to be other family members also. The idea of Yibum is that somebody else takes over for the deceased, and to make up for the brother or for the family. In the case of Elimelech, it wasn't a brother, but somebody in the family took the place of the poor deceased guy who died with no children, and will make up for it. And when they have a child, they'll name him after it. We'll see that when the pasuk talks about when they have a child afterwards, they'll name him al shem achiv. It doesn't really mean we're not talking about literally you have to name it. That's not the chiyuv to name him after the deceased person. That's not really what the mitzvah is, but that's what the pasuk sounds like. It says v'haya b'chora shetela yakom al shem achiv ames. And we'll see what it's really talking about. We learn from that pasuk that the older brothers have to. So let's look at what are we dealing with? We're talking about brothers who are from the father, like Reuven, Shimon, Levi, right? They all had the same father, right? And they're going on. Some of them didn't have the same mother, right? But the mother is not the issue. We only look at it from the father. Now, when is there a mitzvah? Only if the Reuven was married to Leah. And we'll say Shimon, just for an example, Shimon's married to her sister. Two brothers married two sisters, which happens, right? Mutter to do. Now, Reuven died with no children. And his wife, Leah, fell to Shimon. But Shimon's already married to Rachel, her sister. So he can't marry her, right? That's the basic idea we're going to talk about here. The ones that can't get married. The mitzvah is to marry, and that mitzvah, by the way, applies today too. Except that today we don't do yibum, except I think some Sephardic communities did it even until recent times. I don't know what goes on today in every, maybe there's some community in Ethiopia or whatever that does it today. But basically we forbid it. We go with Abba Shaul's idea that the rabbis forbade it because they were afraid that to perform yibum, the person might not do it l'shem mitzvah, but he have it, for carnal intentions. He had a thing for his sister-in-law, So therefore the rabbis forbade it and said do chalitza. The pasuk says you're supposed to marry her, right? If you can't marry her, you don't want to marry her, whatever the reason is, if she refuses to marry him, whatever it is, if he marries her against her will, it's still considered a marriage in that case. Why? Because when the first brother dies, when Reuven dies, and he left over another brother, Shimon, whether Shimon's married or not is irrelevant because polygamy was okay in the time of the Torah. The Torah permits polygamy. There's automatic, as soon as Reuven dies, there's a connection, what we call a zika, between Leah, Reuven's wife, and Shimon, right? There's already a connection there. In fact, there's no kedushin. Midrabanan, we'll talk about mimer later on. They did mimer to make it, you make a little, get an engagement first, right? But there's no midaraisa. You don't need an engagement. You don't need kedushin like in a regular marriage. There's kedushin and then nisuin. Today we do it all at the same time, but there's kedushin and then nisuin. Minatorah, by even there is no kedushin. As soon as Reuven dies and he had a brother Shimon, or any brother, there is a zika and there's a chiyuv to make a yibum. If they don't do the yibum, the Torah says you could do chalitza. You do the process of chalitza. She removes the shoe and spits in front of her. You go to Bezdin and all that. And she says you don't want to marry. And then today you still have chalitza. Even when there's no yibum today, you still have chalitza. This gets to be a problem. You hear about cases like this where a young man moved to Israel, a choser b'tshuva, married a woman, unfortunately got sick and died at age 25. And he had some brother in America who wants nothing to do with some procedure here, but she needs chalitza in order for him to get, in order for her to be able to get remarried to somebody else. Also, the chalitza is necessary even if she doesn't want to get married to somebody else. They had the case in my wife's family a few years ago, in 95. My wife had a great uncle who died with no children. His children from his first marriage had been killed in Auschwitz. And he was remarried a couple times. And his last wife was left in Amman after he died. And he still had a brother in America. The brother in America had to come and perform chalitza. Now she was 85 or 90. It wasn't an issue for getting remarried. I remember I discussed this with Rabbi Dor, and he said, no, it's necessary because to free her, she has to be freed. Even if she's not going to get remarried, there's a need to do chalitza. Now, there's only a mitzvah to do chalitza when there's a mitzvah to do yibum. If there's no mitzvah for yibum, there's no mitzvah for chalitza. So those things go together. There's no such thing in Torah as chalitza. You do chalitza, but you don't do yibum. Now we're going to find many cases throughout this. We got 4 months ahead of us in yibumis where they do chalitza and not yibum, but not because there's no mitzvah to do yibum and then there's a mitzvah to do chalitza. No, it always goes together, as we'll see. Kala ola yibum ola chalitza. What does that mean? That there's no mitzvah to do chalitza when there's no mitzvah to do yibum. There's no such thing. There's only a mitzvah to do chalitza if there's yibum, but you can't perform yibum for some reason. So, or you don't want to do yibum, so you do chalitza. But there are cases, midrabanan, where the rabbi said, do chalitza and don't do yibum for other reasons, because of marasayin, because of this, because of that. But again, it's not like there's a chiyuv to do chalitza and there's no chiyuv to. If there's no chiyuv to do yibum, then there's no chiyuv to do chalitza either. So we're going to see here in the case of Reuven and Shimon married to 2 sisters, and Reuven dies, and Leah, his wife, falls to Shimon, but Shimon can't marry her because he can't marry 2 sisters, right? Pasuk says, "Isha al chasa lo sikach litzror," right? You can't take a woman to be a co-wife, right? You can't take two sisters to be co-wives. So you can't take two sisters to be co-wives, to be rivals. A tzara is the lashon in the Gemara. A tzara, a co-wife or a rival, contending with one another. You can't marry two sisters. So you might say, if you can't marry two sisters, okay, so give her chalitza, right? So Shimon, who's married to Rachel, the sister of Leah, should give Leah chalitza. No, because when there's no yibum, there's no mitzvah of yibum. The Torah says in the case where you can't marry her because she is already a relative, an erva, it's a forbidden marriage. In this case, it would be in what we call incestuous. But any time when you can't marry her because it's considered erva, when there's no mitzvah of yibum, there's no mitzvah of chalitza either. That's the basic idea. There are so for example, I'll give you an example. But there are cases where the rabbi said do chalitza. Most famous case probably is this case. A Kohen is married to Leah, right? Let's say Reuben's a Kohen, and he's married to Leah, and he dies with no children. And his brother Shimon is the Kohen Gadol, Shimon Kohen Gadol, right? Shimon Kohen Gadol. What do you do there? Now, in this case, forget about the fact that it's not even talking about a case of Shimon's. Let's say Shimon's single. He's not married to Rachel. He's not married to no two sisters here. Very simple case. Reuben's a Kohen, married to Leah, and he dies, and he left a brother Shimon, but Shimon's the Kohen Gadol. Now Shimon, he's a Kohen Gadol, so he should be married, right? He's supposed to have a wife. He's got some other wife, right? Not related to Leah. So what do you do? But we have a problem over here because Shimon can only marry a woman who's never a Betula. Okay, fine. So if she's not a Betula because Reuben was married to her, so she's not a Betula presumably. So then there's no problem because even though there's a mitzvah of Yibum, and the pasuk says in Vayetze in Kiseitze, Kiesh Machem Yachtav, two brothers sit together. Brothers are like that Yaakov Avinu, brothers from the father, right? We're talking about that means that they get the same inheritances from the father, and one of them dies and he has no children, so she shouldn't marry somebody else. She shouldn't marry somebody in the street. But okay, there's a mitzvah say. So wait a minute, you have a mitzvah say going against the mitzvah lo say that the Kohen Gadol is not supposed to marry. Very good. So Michael remembers the Gemara from 7.5 years ago. It's a Gemara later on in the Alpha base. Pasuk says there's an asay and a lo say. What's the lo say? He can't marry an almana, right? Almana grusha, he can't marry. And there's a mitzvah say, ki and besula me'achim, he's got to marry a besula. So there we understand why you can't do, why the mitzvah of Yibam doesn't overtake and override the lo say, because of the lo say and asay. And S is not docha lo say. We're going to have in a few days the famous sugya of S is docha lo say. Right, we're going to learn it out. Daf Daled over here is going to talk about Esa Docha Lo Saseh. So Esa is Docha Lo Saseh, Stam Lo Saseh. But here's a say in a Lo Saseh, it's not Docha. But what happens if Reuben was only engaged to Leah? He had Kedushin. Kedushin, I mean real Kedushin, not what we call engagement today, real Kedushin, right? And she's still a Betula. So what Isser would Shimon, the Kohen Gadol, have in marrying her once Reuben dies? Almana, she's still Almana. Esa Docha Lo Saseh. So why shouldn't Shimon, that said that the Kohen, marry her? So the Gemara goes through a whole shaka batari about that, from Sukkah, blah, blah, blah. And we come out at the end, I just want to give this an example. You're right, really there is a mitzvah. And you could perform Yibam. Except the rabbis say don't do it. Why? Because where it goes there, Bia Rishona atu Bia Shniya. Meaning this, there's only a mitzvah the first time to make Yibam to marry her. Afterwards, once he's married to her, there's no mitzvah of Yibam anymore. He's performed the mitzvah, right? The mitzvah is to marry her. He married with the first bia. He's married her, but now there's still an isser. He's married to an almana. The lava of almana is still there. He's not allowed to stay married to. If a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, like a Kohen today who marries a grusha, unfortunately, right? It happens. Coming as a grusha. Is it only isser the first time? He's never supposed to stay married to. He's not supposed to be married to her. Period. So that's the problem. So the rabbi said, you know what? They said do chalitza. They tell Shimon to do Shimon the Kohen Gadol do chalitza, even though technically Esa Docha Lo say the first time, but then when you're married to her afterwards, it would be a problem. So again, what are we saying? I'm just trying to make the point that there is no chalitza when there's no yibum, but over here there is yibum. But the rabbi said in many cases do chalitza not to have other problems. Better do chalitza, not to yibum, which is what we do today. Today, in all cases of yibum, and there are cases that come up, unfortunately, a man dies with no children, even an older man, but certainly a young person who dies and his wife is going to get remarried, you have to do chalitza in order for her to get married achutza. We'll see. If she marries achutza, is the kid a mamzer from that? Well, it's only a lav. It's not really like an isser kores or an isser misa. If she marries, let's say the woman's not religious and she doesn't want to listen, she doesn't care about chalitza and all that stuff. Don't do this hocus pocus to me. I'm getting married anyway. The kid wouldn't be a mamzer, but it would be an isser lav. I mean, according to Rabbi Kiva, it would be a mamzer, but not according to us. So that's part of the. No, only according to Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva holds that even an isser lav, like being an isser lav, that's something which the punishment is only malchus. The product of that is also a mamzer. I always give the example in a case that happened that somebody that we know, and what do I mean by that? That basically, let me get to this idea before I want to give this part of the lecture. The mitzvah is only when there's no children. When there's no children, right? When he dies, when Reuven dies, if there's children, then there's an isser reishasach. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, right? Just like you can't marry your wife's sister, you can't marry your brother's wife. There's an isser. It's like marrying your sister. Your brother's wife is like your sister. So the Torah says you can't marry your brother's wife. It's usher, chiyav kares, and the kid would be a mamzer from there, right? If you marry your brother's wife. Except, you know what? If he had no children, there's a special mitzvah of yibum. But if there's children, or there's some other reason why you're putter from yibum, give me an example. We're going to talk about a case. Here's an example. There's Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, right? Brothers, right? And Reuven dies. But Levi wasn't born yet. You know, they were charedim, and his mother gave birth to Levi after, much later on. And when Reuven died, his wife, Leah, fell to Shimon. Well, okay. Now Shimon dies, also no children, right? And she falls down. Now Levi was born. Levi was born in the interim. Is there a mitzvah? No, because it says ki yeshvu achim yachdav. They had to be together in the world. There's only a mitzvah. Let's say Reuben had no brothers. There's no yibum, right? So if he had a brother that was born after he died, no, there's no yibum. There's no yibum. There's no somebody else. It's only for brothers. He's thinking of Boaz. That was the idea that somebody would take the place. But in the halacha, it's only what the Torah told us. Only brothers, and only brothers from the father. Let's say there was a brother from the mother. Okay, let's say there were two brothers. They had the same mother, right? They didn't have the same father. Not only is there, so if Reuven died, Reuven had a brother Shimon, but they had the same mother, not the same father. So even if there was no children, Shimon's not allowed to marry her. It's what we call Eishasach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah. It's your brother's wife, and there's no mitzvah here at all. Now, when there's no mitzvah, it's an isser. It's considered incest. It's like marrying your sister. As bad as marrying your sister in isser kara, it's the same thing. This is incest. You can't marry your brother's wife. Your brother's wife, if they're brothers from the mother, or brother's wife if the brother had children, or if the brother did not live with you in the same world, meaning Reuven died, and then Reuven's mother, who was still alive, had a child, Levi, subsequent to that, right? Subsequent to that. So even if then, and certainly if she, the wife didn't get married, Leah didn't get married for 20 years, and now like Shayla Bini, wait for Shayla, and then Levi grew up, there's no mitzvah. Even if later on, even if when Reuven died, she married Shimon, and then Shimon died, but since she was also to marry Reuven, because Levi was not allowed to marry Reuven's wife because they weren't in the same world. Once that Isra applies, you can never marry them again. So the same idea that if there's children, it's usher. So we had a case that unfortunately I saw. I mentioned this case many times, that we were doing business in America, and we had there was a printer who was a very good friend of ours. His name was Mo, and he was Jewish. He was he supported Chabad, a very good conservative Jew. He lived in Teaneck, New Jersey. And he said his sister died. And we had to go Menachem Avol him. And his sister was 70. She died at age 70. In those days, 70 was old, And then we were talking about it. He says he has to still visit his father who's in the hospital. So you have a father in the hospital? Your sister died. He's 85. How can you have an 85-year-old father if your sister was 70? So he explained to us the situation. He had an uncle who got married in the early 1900s, And the uncle got married and he had 5 children and he died young at age 30. And his wife was a young wife, right, with 5 children. And the family encouraged her to marry the deceased's brother. And this Mo was from that deceased, was from the brother. In other words, his father was 85, and his sister who died 70 was from the uncle, was not the father's daughter. Okay, nice story. As we leave, and I'm driving on, I said, wait a minute, Mo is a mamzer. Mo is a mamzer. Because his father married Mo's mother, right? Mary's mother, who wasn't allowed to get married to Mo to this man because there were children there. It's Eish Sachem Shalom Makam Mitzvah. It was what, you know, saying, and they didn't realize it. So I said, I was looking for a head. I said, well, maybe the first marriage wasn't really a marriage. Maybe it was a conservative or reform or something like that. But he showed us pictures. The one who married them in the early 1900s, the one who married had a beard and a kapata and everything. It was a proper marriage. Now Mo has no clue that he's a mamzer. Unfortunately, he's not alive anymore. And he had children living in who knows what in California, doctors and lawyers and stuff. Nobody's going to know that they're mamzerim. Mo's a mamzer's children are mamzerim. Nobody's going to know. One day they'll be Bali Tshuva. That's why the whole world is mixed up today. We need Mashiach to come here to Shem B'Karov and straighten out whose mamzer would be mitar the mamzerim. But that's the case. It's a strange thing that the Torah says all these cases are ervas, and you know when these are ervas, there is no yibum. There's no yibum, and therefore it's also to not only is there yibum, it's also because it's mitzvah. So here the Torah, the Gemara starts out. The Mishnah says, "What do we mean by that?"
Ephraim.
Yeah.
Ephraim. How do we deal with a situation today practically where he won't give chalitza? Is that woman considered an aguna in the sense that Bezdin is kofin? What do we do today?
I guess so.
The same as
I don't know
not
what the
giving
business actually do. I've heard cases like that where it's very difficult to get the person, the brother who's not religious or whatever, to give chalitza. I don't know what they do.
Do they force him?
Pardon?
Do we have in other words, by a get you force, right?
I guess, yeah, but Bezdin can. Here in Israel, Bezdin could probably put some thing, but Bezdin has some teeth here. But in Chutz La'aretz, when they have no power, I don't know what they do. It's a problem. She's like an aguna. Exactly, she's like an aguna. So here we're getting, now this is all the simple introduction. Now we're going to get to the problem. The problem is that Sarah, meaning this, Reuven, and they're going back to our case. Reuven is married to Leah. Shimon is brother, and they're brothers from the father. The mother doesn't count. It might be brothers from the mother and the father, but it has to be the mother. If it's only the mother, it's Eishav Shalom Mitzvah. It's like there was children. You're not allowed to marry. And punishment of chorus, and the children would be mamzerim according to everybody. Oh, according to one sheet, you need, according to most sheets, let's say, it would be mamzerim. Let's say so. Now Reuven though has another wife, Chana, right? He's married. He's got 2 wives. He's married to Leah, who's Rachel's sister. Let's keep that in mind. Reuben's married to Leah. Shimon's married to Rachel, the sister. But Reuben's got another wife, Chana. Now Reuben dies with no children, so Shimon can't marry Leah because he's already married to Rachel, the sister. Not only that, he can't marry the Tzara either. Who's the Tzara? Chana. We'll call her Tzara, right? She's the Tzara. Can't marry Chana either. That's what I mean. There's 15 women who are such close relatives to you, meaning that Shimon can't marry them because it's his wife's sister, or maybe it's Reuben's daughter. Can Shimon marry Reuben's daughter? Yes, you can marry your niece. You can't marry your aunt, but you can marry your niece, right? So maybe Shimon was, let's say Shimon was married to Reuben's daughter. Same thing would apply. And now Reuben died, and now Reuben's daughter, right? Reuben's wife, right? Reuben's wife is Reuben's wife is falling yibum to Shimon, right? But Shimon is married to the daughter, right? Is married to the daughter, so he can't marry the wife because he's potter. He's married to I'm sorry, the other way around. Reuben was married to Shimon's daughter. Reuben was married to Shimon's daughter, and Reuben dies. Shimon can't marry his own daughter, so he's potter from Yibam, obviously, potter from Yibam. But not only that, the other one, Chana, that Reuben's married to, when Reuben's married to Chana, he's potter from her too. Why? Because she's a tzara of the erva, so he doesn't marry her either. And then Sarah saying forever, meaning if Hannah now goes and marries another brother, Levi, or Yehuda, let's say, right? So he's also, and then Yehuda dies, Shimon still can't marry Hannah, but he can't marry Hannah's other tzara there too. He married to Hannah, Yehuda marries Hannah now, right? Because Yehuda's another brother. Yehuda's not married to Shimon's, Yehuda's not married to Reuven's sister or to Reuven's daughter or to Reuven's daughter, and he marries Hannah, but he can marry Hannah. But now Yehuda dies, so Hannah cannot marry Shimon again because she's a tzara. But if Yehuda had another wife, whatever, Sarah, whatever her name was, doesn't marry her either. So they're putter forever and ever. In other words, the tsaras keep making more tsaras as they get married more and more. The tsara makes tsaras. All right, we'll talk about the details in Mitzvah tomorrow. But let's just see another couple lines here. Just see the lines. So there's 15 women who, if they're married to Shimon, right? Potter is saying they pater, these women pater the tsaras, meaning Hannah wouldn't get married. The tsaras are saying, and Hannah's tzara, if she marries, let's say Yehuda. Again, if there's no yibum, there's no chalitza. The Gemara will talk about why does it mention chalitza first? Why don't you say pater yibum and chalitza? Because the first preference is to make yibum. The eluhain, and then he starts enumerating who they are. Bito, if, for example, his daughter, right? Like, for example, if Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter, and now Reuven dies, so Shimon can't marry his daughter. Ubas Bito, his granddaughter. Ubas Beno, his granddaughter from his son. Bas Ishto, let's say Reuven's married to Shimon's wife's daughter, right? So Shimon's married to the mother, he can't marry the daughter, he can't marry mother and daughter. Ubas Beno, etc., etc. And Chamosot. All these are the cases where Shimon can't perform yibum because he's married already to a relative of this wife, right? Of this wife, and therefore, again, if he can't marry his daughter, right? Can't marry his daughter, and he can't marry his wife's relative. So because of that, there's no yibum and there's no chalitza. You don't say, okay, you can't do yibum, do chalitza. No, when there's no yibum, there's no chalitza. The only case that we're going to have many cases where you do chalitza, but it's only to avoid a problem. It's not when there's no mitzvah. When you do chalitza, it's because really there is a mitzvah to do yibum, but we don't want to do yibum in this case, like we said, the case of the Kohen Gadol. But if there's no mitzvah of yibum, then there's no mitzvah of chalitza. All right, we'll see this in more detail tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, as we get into the Mishnah, and Mitzvah will make the siyum, and have a good day, everybody.
Mazel tov, friend. Mazel tov, mate.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's the relative case, not the low case.
Yeah.
The kids have to be alive.
Which relative case?
Wasn't it you mentioned?
Oh, where they had children. Yeah.
They had children afterwards.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
In order to not to be the children have to be alive.
Right.
They had children and they
At the
died.
time, if they had children before and they died, then there still is yibum, because it means at the time of death, when Reuven died, if there was any children or not. And in fact, it says bein ein law, v'zera ein law. You have to check. For example, if let's say she's pregnant at the time, so you have to wait and see. That's complicated. We'll see all this in Mitzvah Shem. Yeah.
Not 9:30.
9:30. Mitzvah Shem. Yes. 9:30. Yes. Yeah.
You need
On time.
something? Can I bring something? Can I bring
No.
something?
Everything's taken care of. No. Thank you. Everything's taken care of.
Unless it's a
Okay.
blueberry
Just bring
pie.
yourself. Okay.
Go ahead.